The morning my mother-in-law had me escorted out of my own office by security, I was holding a cup of coffee I had just made. Still hot. I remember thinking that was the strangest detail, that I would never get to drink it. Her name is Margaret Harlow. Everyone in the industry knows that name. Founder and executive chairman of Harlow Structural Group, one of the oldest privately held civil engineering firms in the Southeast. 41 years she had built that company, and for 11 of those years I had helped her keep it standing. My name doesn't matter the way hers does. What matters is what I did, what they took from me, and what happened after. I came to Harlow Structural the way most people come to good jobs, through a combination of being qualified and being lucky. I had spent 6 years at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte after getting my master's in structural engineering from NC State. When a recruiter called me about a senior project manager position at Harlow, I almost declined. The pay was only marginally better, and I had heard things. Family company, she had said over the phone, meaning the founder's family was involved at every level. I knew what that meant. I had seen it before. But the project portfolio was extraordinary: bridges, federal infrastructure contracts, a historic renovation project in Savannah that made the cover of Engineering News Record. I said yes. I met my husband Daniel at a company retreat 18 months into the job. He was not involved in the business at that point. He was finishing his MBA at Emory, working part-time for a commercial real estate firm, living very much in his mother's orbit but not inside it. We dated for 2 years. I liked that he was separate from the office, that I had a life that divided cleanly in half: work on one side, him on the other. When he proposed, I thought I understood what I was agreeing to. I did not. The first years of marriage were fine. Daniel took a consulting position. We bought a house in Decatur. We got a dog. His mother and I were professionally cordial. She would call me by my first name, Claire, with the particular kind of warmth that tells you very little. She complimented my work in the way people compliment work they didn't read. I told myself I was reading too much into things. Then Daniel's older brother Thomas was pushed out. Thomas had been vice president of operations for 8 years. I was never close to him. He was 12 years older than me, and there was a formal distance between us that both of us maintained without ever discussing it. But he had been good at his job. Whatever else I thought about him, that was true. 1/4 the numbers were soft. 2 institutional clients delayed contracts. Thomas took the blame, publicly, in a board meeting I was not invited to, but heard about in full detail by 4 different people within 24 hours. He resigned. My mother-in-law announced it with a press release that used the word transition 4 times in 3 paragraphs. After that, the company changed. Or maybe I changed and I started seeing it clearly. My mother-in-law began pulling me into more and more of the operational work Thomas had handled. Not with a promotion, not with a title change, not with a salary adjustment that reflected what was actually being asked of me. Just with emails. Just with, Claire, can you take point on the Henderson County Bridge project? And Claire, federal compliance reviews are going to need a second set of eyes, yours specifically. I said yes because I always said yes, because the work was interesting and I believed, in the way ambitious people believe things they shouldn't, that the recognition would come. It didn't come. What came instead was a Friday afternoon meeting in her office on the 14th floor, just the 2 of us, 6 years into my time at the company. She set a printed spreadsheet on the desk between us and folded her hands over it. The spreadsheet showed project overruns. 3 of them. She had highlighted my name next to each one in yellow. I recognized every one of those projects. I had inherited 2 of them from Thomas, already behind schedule, already over budget, and taken on the 3rd as a favor when another PM had a family emergency. I had documented all of this. I had sent emails. I had flagged the inherited issues in writing within my first week on each project, with specific numbers, specific concerns, specific requests for resources that were denied or ignored. I said all of that in her office, calmly, with dates. She listened the way people listen when they have already decided. Then she said, "I expect more accountability from someone in your position, Claire." I drove home that night with both hands tight on the wheel and said nothing to Daniel. I didn't know how to say it. I had married into this. There was no clean separation anymore. I started keeping records. Not because I was planning anything, just because I had learned that day that my memory was not enough. After that, I documented everything. Every project I inherited, every resource request that was denied, every email I sent flagging a risk, and every response that either minimized it or didn't come at all. I kept it in a folder on my personal laptop backed up to my personal cloud storage. I told no one. The years that followed had a particular texture I can only describe now in retrospect. You get used to things. You get used to being overlooked, and then you get used to defending work that was never yours to defend in the first place. And then you get used to the discomfort of both until it stops feeling like discomfort and just feels like the job. I got promoted once to Director of Infrastructure Projects with a salary increase that was $7,000 less than what the same title paid the man who held it before me. I found that out by accident, through a benefits document that crossed my desk with the wrong name on the header. I didn't say anything. I wrote it down, added it to the folder. Daniel knew something was wrong. Not the specifics. I had learned to be careful about the specifics because he loved his mother in the uncomplicated way people love parents who have never truly wronged them. And every time I tried to describe what the office was actually like, the conversation would soften somewhere in the middle and I would watch him land on, "I'm sure she doesn't mean it that way." So I stopped explaining and he stopped asking, and we had a marriage that worked in most of the ways that matter and failed quietly in this one. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in Savannah. A site visit for a pedestrian bridge project, one of 3 federal contracts I was currently managing, standing on a dock looking at preliminary foundation work with the project foreman when my phone buzzed. My mother-in-law. I stepped away from the crew and answered. She didn't open with a greeting. She said, "I've been reviewing the portfolio allocations and I've made a decision. We're restructuring the director level. Your position is being eliminated effective at the end of this pay period." I stood on that dock with my phone against my ear and the October air coming off the Savannah River, and I thought, for one clear and entirely rational moment, that I had misheard her. I said, "I'm sorry, what?" She repeated it, same words, same tone. Then she said, "HR will be in contact about your separation agreement. There will be a standard NDA component, of course." I asked if I could ask one question. She said yes. I asked who would be taking over the 3 federal contracts I was currently managing. She paused. Then she said, "We're handling the transition internally." She hung up. I stood there for another minute. The foreman was looking at me from across the dock. I walked back over, told him something had come up and I needed to reschedule, shook his hand, and drove to my hotel. Sat on the edge of the bed. Opened my laptop. I pulled up all 3 federal contracts, looked at the compliance deadlines, looked at the specific certification requirements that the federal clients had stipulated. Then I opened a new document and started writing. Because here is what my mother-in-law did not know, or did not consider, or chose not to consider. 2 of the 3 federal contracts I managed were contingent on my personal engineering credentials and my signature on specific compliance filings, not the company's. Mine. I had been named as the responsible engineer of record on both contracts at the client's request. Federal agencies who had worked with me personally on earlier projects and had made my involvement a contractual condition. She hadn't fired a director. She had just pulled the structural pin on 2 active federal contracts worth a combined $34 million. I didn't call her back. I called my personal attorney, a woman named Ruth who had handled my employment contract when I first joined Harlow, and who I had kept on retainer in a vague, hopeful I'll never need you way for 11 years. I told Ruth everything. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Don't sign anything. Don't respond to HR. Come see me Thursday." I flew home Wednesday. Daniel picked me up from the airport. In the car, I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sure she had her reasons." I looked at him. He was watching the road. I said, She fired me, Daniel. She fired me from your family's company while I was standing on a job site managing her federal contracts. He said, she runs the business. She has to make hard decisions sometimes. I didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. Ruth spent 2 hours with me on Thursday. She reviewed the contracts, reviewed my documentation, all of it, the whole 11 years of the folder I had built, and then she leaned back in her chair and said, "They have a problem." The federal clients had to be notified. Regulatory requirement. When a named engineer of record is removed from an active federally funded project, the contracting agency is entitled to notice and has the right to review the transition plan. Ruth sent the required notifications on my behalf on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, I had received calls from both federal project officers. By the following Monday, Harlow Structural had received formal notices of concern from both agencies, with requests for a meeting to discuss continuity of the projects. I was not in that meeting. I was told about it afterward in pieces by someone who was my sister-in-law, Vanessa. Vanessa was Thomas's ex-wife. They had divorced 4 years earlier, amicably enough, and she had remained on the company's legal team because she was genuinely excellent at her job, and because my mother-in-law respected competence in a way she didn't always respect family. Vanessa and I had been careful around each other for years, not unfriendly, just measured. We occupied the same spaces without quite overlapping. She texted me on a Monday night. It said, "Can we meet? Not at the office, somewhere else." We met at a coffee shop in Midtown on Tuesday morning. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me and said, "I need you to know something." And then she told me. The restructuring my mother-in-law had described to me was real, but it wasn't what she had told me it was. It wasn't about eliminating a director level. It was specifically about me. There were board meeting minutes that Vanessa had seen in her capacity as outside legal counsel that documented a conversation about my role, my compensation relative to what comparable roles commanded at competitor firms, and the line of concern that my mother-in-law had raised. The line, as Vanessa related to me, was this: Claire knows too much about the operational gaps. She needs to be managed out before the Meridian audit. Meridian was a private equity firm that had been in quiet conversations with Harlow Structural about a possible acquisition. An acquisition at the senior level would have required a thorough operational audit, and the operational gaps that my mother-in-law was worried about me knowing I knew them. I had documented some of them. I had flagged them internally and been ignored. They were part of my folder. I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked Vanessa why she was telling me. She said, because she did the same thing to Thomas, and I watched it happen and I didn't say anything, and I have thought about that every day since. I asked her if she would be willing to put any of what she told me in writing. She looked at me for a long moment, then she said yes. The NDA my mother-in-law had mentioned in the original call was sent to me formally the following week. It was, as Ruth described it to me, unusually broad. It covered not just standard confidentiality around business operations, but included language that would have prohibited me from discussing the circumstances of my separation with the federal clients, with potential future employers who might ask for references, or in any legal proceeding that was not directly initiated by me. Ruth sent back a counter that said I would not be signing it. The same day that counter was delivered, I sent a formal letter to both federal project officers outlining the circumstances of my removal, the board documentation Vanessa had provided in the form of a sworn statement, and a formal offer to complete the compliance filings that were due within the next 60 days under my credentials as a contracted independent consultant if Harlow Structural agreed to engage me in that capacity. The federal clients don't like contract disruption. They like it even less when they discover the disruption was made without notice and in possible violation of contract terms. Both agencies forwarded my letter to their respective compliance offices. What happened next happened fast. Within 2 weeks, the Meridian due diligence team, which had been quietly evaluating the company, received information through the federal compliance review process that altered their assessment significantly. 3 of the items in my documentation folder flagged resource shortfalls, 2 safety incidents that had been internally minimized and not reported to the relevant federal oversight body, and the board minutes that Vanessa had sworn to become part of a compliance inquiry. My mother-in-law's attorneys reached out to Ruth about a settlement conversation. Ruth told them we would be happy to have that conversation. She named a number. It was not a small number. It accounted for 11 years of the differential between what I had been paid and what the role should have commanded, plus damages, plus the costs of the federal compliance exposure that my documentation had contributed to surfacing. There were 3 weeks of back and forth that I was not directly part of. Ruth handled it. I went back to Savannah twice to meet with the federal project officers directly, as a consultant now, to walk through the compliance filings. The foreman I had worked with recognized me when I showed up the second time. He said, "I'm glad you're back." The other person they sent didn't know what she was looking at. I told him I wasn't back exactly. I was just finishing something. The settlement was reached on a Thursday morning in late November. It was confidential, which is why I can tell you the shape of it without the specific number. It covered the compensation differential and damages. It required Harlow Structural to provide me with a neutral reference confirming my years of service and the titles I had held. It did not require me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. My mother-in-law did not sign it personally. Her attorney signed it. I heard through Vanessa that the Meridian acquisition was restructured, significantly reduced in scope and reduced in valuation because the compliance inquiry had surfaced enough operational concerns that the equity firm revised their offer downward. My mother-in-law retained control of the company. That wasn't the outcome I had aimed for. I hadn't aimed for any particular outcome for her specifically. I had aimed to not be erased and to finish what I had started. Vanessa stayed on the legal team. She called me in December to let me know she had negotiated a new contract for herself, better terms, explicit scope of her responsibilities, nothing undefined. She said, "You gave me the nerve to ask for what I should have asked for years ago." I told her she had given me something too. She had given me a witness. When you have spent years believing that the things happening to you are real and documented and provable, but no one around you is saying so, it matters more than I can fully articulate to have one person sit across from you in a coffee shop and say, "Yes, I saw it too. It was real." Daniel and I separated in January. That is a harder and quieter story than this one, and it belongs to both of us in a way that this one only belongs to me, so I will say only this: he is not a bad person. He loved his mother in a way that made it impossible to also fully see me, and I had known that for longer than I admitted. We are working through the logistics now. I kept the dog. His name is Beaumont, and he takes up most of the bed, and I am not sorry about either of those things. I started my own consulting practice in February, infrastructure compliance and project oversight, with a focus on federally funded civil projects. I have 2 of the federal agencies I worked with at Harlow as early clients. One of the project officers told me, when we were finalizing our consulting agreement, that the agency had specifically requested me by name. I asked him why. He said, "Because you finished the Savannah Bridge filing in the middle of everything else that was happening, and you did it right." I have a small office in a building in Midtown. There is a window that looks out over the street, and in the mornings when I get in early, before the city fully wakes up, I make coffee and stand at that window for a few minutes before I start. I think about that cup of coffee I never got to drink on the morning I was walked out. I think about the folder I kept for 11 years, all those documented dates and emails and numbers, carried quietly like something I hoped I would never need and always suspected I would. I think about what I was protecting when I kept those records. I told myself it was evidence. I think what I was actually protecting was the version of events that was true, the true account of what I did and what was done to me and what it was worth. I was protecting the story, because I knew, somewhere underneath everything, that the day would come when the story would matter, when someone would finally have to reckon with it. That day came, and I was ready. There's a line from the board minutes that Vanessa read to me in that coffee shop in Midtown. She needs to be managed out before the audit that I've thought about more than I expected to. Not because it hurt. It did at first. But what I kept coming back to was how ordinary it sounded, how transactional. 11 years of work and the calculation was that clean. I don't think Margaret saw herself as someone doing something wrong. That's the part people miss when they hear a story like this. She had run that company for 41 years. She had made 1,000 decisions. I think she genuinely believed that what she was doing was protecting something she had built, and that I was a liability to be moved, not a person to be answered to. That belief and the pattern of behavior that came from it, ignoring warnings, suppressing reports, eliminating people who knew too much, those were the things that actually cost her, not me. The choices she made, compounding over years, were always going to surface somewhere. I just happened to be the place they surfaced. I've thought about what I did differently, what let me walk out of that situation with something intact. Part of it was practical, the documentation, the legal counsel, the contract language I happened to understand. But I think the deeper thing was that I had never stopped paying attention to what was actually true, even when it wasn't useful to say so. Even when Daniel would soften in the middle of a conversation and I knew nothing I said would land. I kept my own record of what was real. That discipline, that refusal to let the version of events around me replace the version I had actually lived that mattered when it finally counted. And then there was the decision to finish the Savannah compliance filings. I didn't have to do that. I was already gone. Ruth would have told me to let the contracts lapse and let Harlow manage the fallout, but those were federal projects. Real infrastructure. And there was a foreman on that dock who didn't know what was happening in the corporate offices and was just trying to do his job. I finished the filings because it was the right thing to finish, and because I knew I had done it right, and because I was not willing to let what they did to me become a reason to do less than I was capable of. Vanessa called it nerve. I think it was something quieter than that. It was just knowing what I stood for, when no one was asking me to stand for anything. The work I'm doing now, the consulting practice. The federal clients who ask for me by name, none of it would exist if I had signed that NDA. None of it would exist if I'd kept my head down one more time, swallowed one more unfair evaluation, let one more year pass without asking what this was costing me. The cost of staying silent compounds the same way the cost of bad decisions does. I learned that late, but I learned it. I kept that folder for 11 years because some part of me understood that the truth would eventually need somewhere to live. I'm glad I gave it a place.